Let's talk about pivot tables in Excel. So when we start talking about pivot tables, it's helpful to understand what that means. If I have this data here where I have purchases by category and amount, if I want to create a pivot table to show me purchases by category, instead of listing every single thing, I'm going to list every item once. So rent, I list once. Groceries, I list once. And then I'll sum up how much for each category. So rent had only one entry of $1,000. So that was the sum of rent. But grocery had two entries, 50 and 20. So that total, that $70 total, will go next to that. And I have manually created a pivot table showing me the total purchase amounts by category. Well, let's take a look at how you can do this in Excel automatically. Okay, I have my data in Excel. Before I actually go and make a pivot table, I want to do a few things to make my data really clean and work well for me. The first is create a table. To do that, I'm going to select the top leftmost cell of the data. I'm going to hold down Command Shift on Mac or Control Shift on Windows and click the right arrow key to select the rightmost column. And then the down arrow key, I'm still holding Command and Shift, and it selects all of my data. Now I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to click Table. This is saying, okay, is this the data in your table? Yes, it is. And I definitely want to check my table has headers. That would be the column headers, and click OK. Cool things that this does, it adds my formatting so it's a little easier to see the rows, and it adds little tools to the top of both columns to help me filter and sort and things like that. The next thing I want to do is make sure my data is formatted the way I want. In particular, I want to make sure my amount is formatted as money. So I'm going to select that column, column B here, and in the Home tab under General, I want to choose accounting. And this is going to set all of my content to money values that are all lined up by the decimal, so it's easy to see the big numbers, the small numbers. If I had a specific type of data for column A, I would also set that. In this case, general is fine. All right, since we have this in a table, let's take a look at one of the really cool things you can do with a table in Excel. I'm going to put my mouse in a cell in the table, and then I'll select the table menu, and I'm going to check the box for total row. And what this does is the bottom of my table, it adds in a row, and I can select any of the cells in this content to set what kind of information I want to show here. So by default, it's giving me a sum of the amounts, but I could switch this and I could get an average instead. I could get the maximum, the minimum, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that's really great about tables is as I'm scrolling, I can still see my table headers without having to freeze anything, which is not great for accessibility, freezing. So having those table headers available and the menu for them, regardless of whether I'm scrolling or not, is also super useful. Okay, so now that I have my data in a table, we can go ahead and make a pivot. To do a pivot table, we're going to go back to the Insert menu. I'm going to select a cell in my table, and I'm going to click on Pivot Table. And this is going to say what I want to select from, and that would be Table 1. That's the table I created. And I want to place it in a new worksheet, so I'll click OK. And down in the bottom left, I can see a new worksheet has been added. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And on the right-hand side, I can see my pivot table field tool. So what I want to do is I want to do the same thing we created manually. So I want to see the total amount spent by category. So I need to use both these fields names. Category, I'll select it, and amount, I'll select it. Now, by default, it's adding these exactly where I want. So the category, that word-based label, it's adding as a row, which is the default. And the money amount, it's adding into the values by default. And that's exactly what I wanted to create. And I can see my pivot, which manually created in just a few clicks. Now I'm back in my table here, and let's say that I want to make a pivot table, but I only want to add up values that are greater than $100. I could do this in my pivot table with a filter, but I want to show you another cool way to add a column that can help you make this. So I am going to add a column here, and this is going to be whether or not the amount is greater than $100. So I'm going to title this column greater than $100. And once I've typed that column header in, it's automatically added a column for me. And what I'm going to do here is write a formula. So I'm going to click in C2 and I'm going to write a formula with an if. So I clicked up into the formula bar, I'll type equals to start my formula, and then if, and then open parentheses. And what I want to look at is the value in the amount column. So I'm going to go ahead and click in B2, and then I'm going to type greater than sign and 100. And if this is true, I want to enter true and comma into my else value. If it's false, I want to enter Boolean term false. When I hit enter, because I'm working in a table, it automatically populates my formula all the way down the table. And now I can go over to my pivot table, go to my pivot table, analyze. And I'm going to hit the refresh button, and that's going to pull in the new field or the new column from my main data set greater than 100. Now for this one, I want to add it as a filter. So I'm going to click on this and drag it and drop it into the filters area. And then at the top of my pivot table, it adds this little filter tool here. I'm going to click the drop down in this. And in the tool it opened up, I'm going to uncheck false. I only want things that are true there. And once I've done that, I have my pivot table created now, only showing values greater than $100. So this is pretty simple and basic with this small data set. But imagine again, if you had thousands of rows and if your amounts were all thousands of discrete values, you're not going to want to sit there and filter out and check all those boxes. So add that helper column and you can really easily create this pivot filtered based on values over 100.